So Paul is a UK and international advisor on cities, regions and local economies, and he's also been working with us at the Gather team.
Doing place reviews.
Really looking at how cities actually work. So really excited to hear more about what he understands of London as a place.
Great. It's a real pleasure to be with you this morning to share a short glimpse about trying to understand what London is as a place, which is quite a thing to do in just 15 minutes. Next slide, please. But I'm much more comfortable talking about place and understanding place, but the theology of place and cities is quite new to me. But I'm kind of digging into it as I kind of do work with the Gather movement. But I found these sources very helpful. Exiles on Mission by Paul Williams, and of course there's a whole load of material by the late Tim Keller that's available. And I think a couple of points I just want to make there headlines. So why, first of all? Or who we are. We're exiles. As Christians, we're exiles in the city. So if we're exiles, what should our role be? Well, the argument there is our role is to be ambassadors for Christ in the city. Now, if you're going to be an ambassador, you have to have knowledge. Obviously, you have to have knowledge about theology and Christian. But a very important part of the knowledge you need to have as an ambassador if you're going to be a city is to understand the place and understand the city. It's very important. And then obviously the next stage is how do we work? We work where we're called to be, but we work collectively. We work together, as you're showing today. So I think that's an important foundation to why understanding London as a place is really important. Next slide, please. Okay, well, there's all sorts of ways I could use to describe London, sum it up. So these are just 3 points I want to emphasize to start with. First of all, how London is special, its people, I think is absolutely central. The first quotation is attributed to Paddington Bear. It's a great quotation. In London, everyone is different, and that means anyone can fit in. And that's, I think, really important thing. Secondly, London is very distinctive in particular ways. London always reminds me of a brain. It is similarly convoluted and circular. A lot of cities, especially American ones like New York and Chicago, are laid out in straight lines. But London is a glorious mess. And it's because it never got changed even by the Great Fire of London. The layout of London is the same. So whenever you turn a corner, it's always different, and that's something that's special. If any of you have been to Barcelona, you walk along from the old cathedral to the new cathedral, you always go through straight lines, okay? And then you turn a right angle and then go straight on. You don't do that in London. It's special. So how do you observe London? I'm going to really emphasize this in this talk. You need to walk. And I think these are 2 great quotations from Virginia Woolf about to walk alone in London is the greatest rest. And then I've been walking in London for 30 years and I find something fresh every day. I think it's really important element of London. So next slide, please. But before we go into London, we have to think about out of London, because London is a very special city. It's not just a global city, but it's obviously UK's biggest city, and it operates completely differently to the rest of the urban system in the UK. These lines are the travel to work movements, and this is the connectivity that takes place that forms the London greater city region in the way it operates. Now, this is really important because it means that London economy operates almost like segmented to the rest of the UK. And it's almost as if London, in a description, plays a rugby union football, okay, and the rest of the country plays rugby league. It's like we're playing the same game, but we play it completely differently, which is one of the reasons why the rest of the country is so much weaker economy than it is down in the southeast. But I think we need to understand that and appreciate that. Next, please. Okay. Let's think a little about London itself. This is the kind of spatial footprint of London. And the really important and interesting thing about this is the way that London contains lots of patterns, okay, in the way it operates. So right in the centre, you have the skyline city, the global city. Then you come out to the metropolitan city. Then you go into the regional city. Then you go into local urban centres, and then dense neighbourhoods. And then you come out to outer London, and then of course it's very much different and very spread out in the way it operates, which is that part of the city that's really come from the beginning of the 20th century. So actually it's very patterned in the way it operates, and as you can see from that diagram, that's a really important part of London because of the way it's been built up from Roman times until today. And as I say, the foundations really haven't changed throughout those centuries. Next slide. But then if we look at it again in a different way, these are the idea of neighbourhoods. Each of these squares is 1 kilometre along. So they're quite big to try and look at an area because London, as you know, you go from rich to poor very, very quickly in London. But it kind of shows interesting patterns, really. It shows that obviously you have the kind of poorer areas that are kind of having much more difficult times, the reds, the kind of more multicultural London that's there, and then the neighbourhoods that are doing better, the greens on the outside. So you can see, to some extent, in a broad terms, disparity between inner London and outer London. As I said, that's in a kind of exaggeration because it's much more complicated than that, as we'll see in a moment. So next slide. Now, these are the census maps for 2021, and you can, if you want to look at them, they're very easy to look on the web and go through at very great and very local detail. But it shows the pattern of poverty, showing this line down here is particularly the kind of poorest area if you take into account sort of a whole group of issues of deprivation. But of course, again, that is a oversimplified pattern because once you go on to the next map, next slide please, you begin to see that the whole pattern of deprivation in London is very complicated indeed. This is the kind of index of multiple deprivation. It's a whole range of indicators that are put together. The brighter the red is the poorer, the darker the blue is the richer, if you like, in the way it kind of works. And again, you see this pattern in East London over here, but of course it's much more spread out all over the city in the way it works. And it's kind of indication of just how diverse and how mixed London is in the way it operates. Next one, please. So, let's just try and kind of bring this together, really. I'm sure many of you represent a local church in a local area, and you tend to kind of think that way. But I want to encourage you to kind of open your mind to think beyond your immediate neighbourhood, to try and to understand the context of which you're operating goes much more widely. It may be that where you work, if we think about this first quotation, London opens to you like a novel itself. It is divided into chapters, the chapters into scenes, the scenes into sentences. It opens you up to a series of rooms, doors and passages. It may be that where you work, where you're based, you're much more tempted to think about the rooms, doors and passages rather than the whole novel, which is called London. I want to encourage you, really, to try and think beyond that a little bit in what you do. Let's just take this lane, Brick Lane, in East London. I'm sure most of you will know that lane. And of course, when you walk down it, it's a bit of a tourist area. It's got lots of restaurants that have grown up there over the years that I've known. When I first started working in London, there are only 2 restaurants in that street. But it's also a very poor area of London locally. It's where the Bangladeshi community are concentrated. And you can think of it in a kind of static way of just being a poor area with particular concentration of ethnic minority communities, particularly from Bangladesh. Some of them are Jewish as well. But if you start to think of it more dynamically, you start to think about an area of London that has been impacted by persecution and wars and other changes across Europe over many years. So you've had great influxes that have changed and impacted on the architecture, the shape, and everything that's going into it. And that's really important because, as this second quotation says, Places are not local things. They are movements in large-scale things. The large-scale things we call cities. Places or your local neighbourhood do not make cities. It is cities that make places. And I think I would really like to encourage you to think about that in the work you're doing as a local movement. Last slide, please. So, as I kind of bring this together, obviously we are incredibly privileged to have the opportunity to work in London. It's a very special city, as the great architect Norman Foster has acknowledged. I come from Portobello Road. As I said, I was in London. My roots are in Portobello Road. It's where my great-grandfather came and opened a shop in the 1920s. It's where my parents lived when I was born. I lived the first couple of years in London at that stage. I came back to London in my 20s and lived there in a family flat for a number of years as well. If you ask me, I would say I'm from Portobello Road. I'm not from London. But I do know that Portobello Road has been shaped by much more forces than actually occurs in that street. It's part of a bigger picture, and to understand that picture is very important. So if you want to, if you like, engage with this agenda, trying to think about your place, can I advise you or suggest 3 things you might like to do? First, think about the geography of where you are. And the best way of thinking about that geography is to get out and walk and pray about that area. When I do reviews for the Gather movement in other places, I love to get out and walk around the city and pray, and I just ask the Lord, please show me and help me to understand what I'm seeing in this city. And I think that's really important. Get out and learn. And don't just go down and learn where you're based. Go out to other parts of London and see what's going on. Think about how it all fits together. Secondly, think about the history. History is really important, as I gave the example of Brick Lane, how the history of migration and persecution in Europe and other parts of the world have been so important in shaping that part of London. So observe, listen, and read. And then thirdly, be relational, as you're doing today. Connect and work collaboratively. And in doing that, respond to the local within the kind of bigger picture of what's going on. And together, work to agree the appropriate scales for cooperation and working together. Thank you.